The great warship of the Caltheri fleet loomed in the endless dark of space, its massive frame glistening like a predator in the void of stars. Admiral Valak stood on the observation deck, staring out at the ever-expanding horizon of the galaxy, his mind always focused on the mission, the strategy, the cold calculation of war. The Caltheri had faced countless species in battle, and emerged victorious each time. Their advanced technology and superior tactics had made them a feared power across the stars. But something about this moment felt different. There was something new and unexpected in the air today, something that tugged at the edges of his perception. Before him was the latest addition to the fleet, a curious experiment brought aboard by the human delegation, a child barely 10 years old sitting in front of a Starship simulator, her small hands moving quickly over the controls, her fingers dancing across the buttons with surprising precision. Valak had heard of the humans before. They were a young species compared to the Caltheri. Their technology was still in its infancy, but they had earned a reputation for their cunning and ingenuity. They had survived wars. They should have lost and conquered enemies far more powerful than they had any right to face. As the child's avatar on the screen deftly avoided a barrage of simulated laser fire and navigated a maze of asteroid fields, Valak found himself drawn into her play. The movements were flawless. The speed at which she reacted to changing scenarios was nothing short of extraordinary for someone so young and inexperienced. To be able to do this with ease was not just impressive, it was baffling. He watched as she executed a series of precise maneuvers, avoiding a massive enemy cruiser, and then expertly countering with a series of calculated strikes that would have taken most seasoned pilots hours to perfect. Her virtual ship moved with a fluidity and grace that seemed almost natural to her. Valak leaned forward from the observation deck, unsure of what he was seeing. He had known that humans could adapt quickly. He had known that they were unpredictable. But this was something different. This was not a display of learned skill or advanced training. It was something far deeper, something instinctive. The Admiral could feel a subtle unease creeping into his thoughts. He was not used to feeling this way. Not in all his years of battle and conquest had he ever witnessed such an effortlessly graceful form of combat. It wasn't just a game to her, it was something more, something inside of her mind that allowed her to see patterns and possibilities others could not grasp. It was as though the child were living in the simulation, as if the very game itself had become an extension of her mind. Her movements were not the result of data or pre-programmed responses. They were the result of something far more intuitive, something that transcended logic. Valak couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen as the child expertly outwitted every obstacle that came her way. He had seen the best pilots in the galaxy fail against such odds, yet here was a human child with no training and no experience in real combat, performing feats of strategic brilliance that most adult warriors could only dream of. His curiosity piqued. He couldn't help but wonder if this was a fluke, if the child had just been lucky, or if there was something more to it, something hidden deep within the human psyche that allowed them to thrive under the most extreme conditions. Valak's mind raced as he watched the child's every move, his eyes glued to the screen, wondering if it was just a coincidence or if there was something more at play. He had seen many simulations in his time, and he had witnessed plenty of gifted pilots and strategists. But this was different. The child's reactions were too quick, too fluid for a mere game. The way she moved the ship through obstacles with an ease that defied logic made him uneasy. For the first time in years, he felt a deep curiosity gnaw at him. He needed answers. He stood there for a moment, watching as the child's avatar dodged yet another incoming wave of simulated missiles, the ship twisting and turning with impossible accuracy. The child's face was calm. There was no sign of stress or fear in her expression. It was as though she were taking a casual stroll through the stars, rather than playing a high-stakes battle simulation. To her, it seemed like nothing more than a simple game, yet Valak knew better. This was more than just play. This was instinctive strategy at work. He turned to one of his officers, a Caltheri named Zren, who had been standing nearby watching the simulation unfold. "Zren, do you see what I see?" he asked, his voice low and filled with a strange tension. Zren's eyes narrowed as he studied the child's actions. "Yes, Admiral, this is unusual," he replied. "Her movements, they're not like those of a typical child. She's showing a level of coordination and reflexes beyond anything I would expect." Valak nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "And it's not the simulator's programming?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Zren paused and checked the data feeds. "No, sir, everything is running within the expected parameters. It's the child's actions that are outside of those parameters. She's not simply reacting to the program, she's anticipating it, she's predicting it before it even happens." The Admiral's brow furrowed. "How is that possible? She has no training, no experience. She's just a child." Zren didn't respond right away, his eyes flicking back to the screen as the child's avatar once again executed an impossible evasive maneuver, twisting around a barrage of incoming fire with a speed and precision that should have been impossible for someone her age. Valak's curiosity deepened and his thoughts began to shift. He had spent years studying his enemies, the great tacticians and strategists of the galaxy. He had battled countless species and learned the subtle art of warfare. But this was different. This was something he had never encountered before, and it was coming from a human child. Could it be? Valak muttered under his breath. Could humans have some kind of innate ability that allows them to learn and adapt so quickly? Zren glanced at the Admiral with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "You think the child's ability is more than just skill?" he asked. "I don't know," Valak admitted. "But it feels as though we're missing something fundamental about the humans, something that sets them apart from every other species we've encountered." Zren nodded slowly as they both watched the child's avatar dodge another series of attacks and execute a flawless counterattack against a virtual enemy ship. The Admiral's mind raced. He had to understand what was happening here. This wasn't just a simple game. This was a glimpse into something far greater, a potential he had never considered before. The more Valak watched, the more the unease grew. The child's actions on the simulator screen were becoming increasingly difficult to explain. Every move she made seemed to defy the natural limitations of a human mind. It wasn't just her reflexes or the way she avoided obstacles. It was how she anticipated the game's patterns, how she seemed to predict the actions of the enemy fleet before they even launched their attacks. There was a certain fluidity to her movements that no system, no training, should have produced. Valak's mind raced, running through every possibility, every logical explanation. He had seen humans fight with incredible bravery, using unconventional tactics to win battles against superior forces. But this was different. This child wasn't merely reacting to stimuli. She was thinking several moves ahead, the way a master strategist would. He turned back to Zren, his thoughts crystallizing. "Have there been any reports about human children displaying unusual cognitive abilities?" he asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Zren hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the question. "There have been rumors," he said, his voice low, as though reluctant to speak of such things. "Stories of human children who demonstrated extraordinary intelligence, some even able to navigate complex technology or solve problems well beyond their years. But I've never seen anything like this." Valak frowned. "This cannot be a coincidence," he said, more to himself than to Zren. "I've fought against numerous species in my lifetime, each one with its strengths and weaknesses, but this is something else entirely. It's as if the child is operating on a level we've never seen before, and it's not just instinct, it's something else." Zren nodded slowly, clearly perplexed but intrigued. If this is something innate, something natural to humans, it could explain how they've survived and even thrived in situations where they were outmatched. Maybe it's not their technology that sets them apart. It's their ability to adapt, to think beyond what is immediately in front of them. The Admiral's eyes narrowed as the child's avatar in the simulator effortlessly outwitted an entire fleet of simulated ships, each move more intricate than the last. Her reactions weren't just fast. They were calculated, precise, with an uncanny sense of timing. Valak had never seen anything like it. What if their true strength isn't in their technology or their armies? Valak murmured, his voice growing distant as he watched the child's ship glide through the chaos of virtual combat. What if it's something in their minds, something deep within them, that makes them unpredictable? Zren looked at him with growing concern. Are you saying that humans? I'm saying that humans might possess an ability we've overlooked, Valak interrupted, his voice gaining strength. Something that allows them to think in ways we can't even comprehend. Something that makes them unpredictable, dangerous. Zren was silent for a long moment as the realization set in. If what the Admiral was suggesting was true, then the implications were far-reaching. The Caltheri had always prided themselves on their strategic brilliance, but if humans were capable of tapping into something fundamentally different in their minds, something beyond the scope of logic and reason, then they could be a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Admiral turned back to the screen, his eyes fixed on the child, who was now in the midst of a flawless counterattack against a fleet of virtual enemy ships. A slow, unsettling smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as the pieces began to fall into place. This was not just a human child playing a game. This was a glimpse into the true nature of the human race, and it was far more than he had ever anticipated. Valak's mind churned as he continued to watch the child's flawless performance on the simulator. Each move she made seemed to defy the limits of her age and experience, as though she were tapping into something more profound, something buried deep within the human psyche. The more he thought about it, the more he began to question everything he thought he knew about humanity. Turning away from the screen, the Admiral paced across the observation deck, his sharp mind working furiously to piece together the fragments of information that were slowly coming into focus. Zren, still standing by his side, watched him closely, waiting for the next command, the next question that might reveal more about what was unfolding. Zren, Valak said after a moment, his voice low and pensive. Do we have access to any detailed records on the human species? I need everything, every report, every study, every piece of data that could give us insight into how their minds work. Zren hesitated, clearly taken aback by the Admiral's sudden shift in focus. I can gather the information, but what exactly are you looking for, Admiral? I need to understand their cognitive abilities, Valak replied. There's something about this child's gameplay, something beyond simple skill or instinct. She's thinking differently. She's perceiving the situation in a way that is not just fast, but anticipatory, as if she can see the future before it happens. Zren frowned. But that's impossible, Admiral. No species can predict the future. Valak stopped pacing and turned to face him, his expression grave. Perhaps, but what if they don't need to predict the future? What if they simply understand it in a way we don't? What if human minds are wired to adapt and respond to complex situations with a kind of brilliance we've never considered? Zren's brow furrowed as he processed the Admiral's words. Are you suggesting that humans can think in ways we can't even imagine? That their minds operate on a different level? Valak nodded slowly. Exactly. Every battle I've fought, every enemy I've faced, has followed certain patterns, predictable patterns. But this child is not following any pattern I've seen before. She's making decisions that don't rely on logic, but on something deeper, something instinctive. Zren stood in stunned silence for a moment, then turned to the screen once more. The child's avatar was now engaged in a battle with an enemy fleet twice the size of her own, but she was outmaneuvering them effortlessly, dodging incoming fire and striking with unerring precision. It was as if she knew exactly what the enemy would do before they did it, as though she was reading their minds. Perhaps we've been wrong about humanity all along, Valak murmured, almost to himself. Perhaps their strength lies not in their technology or their armies, but in their ability to evolve, to adapt to any situation, to think in ways that are unpredictable to us. Zren didn't respond immediately, but the weight of the Admiral's words hung heavily in the air. The realization was dawning on both of them. If humanity could adapt in such a way, if their minds could work outside the realm of what the Caltheri had ever encountered, then they were no longer a species to be underestimated. They were a force that could change the very nature of warfare itself. Valak turned back to the screen, his gaze fixed on the child's avatar as she continued to defy all odds. The realization that humanity might possess an ability to think and act beyond reason, beyond conventional understanding, left him with a sense of both awe and fear. This was no longer just a game. This was a warning. And Valak knew that the galaxy was about to witness a shift that no one, not even the Caltheri, could predict. As the Admiral stood there, contemplating the implications of his findings, a sense of urgency began to rise within him. The child's performance on the simulator was no longer just an anomaly to be examined. It was a turning point, a revelation that demanded deeper understanding. Valak had seen countless battles and understood the intricacies of war, but the human mind, as he now realized, was an entirely different battlefield. "Zren," Valak said, his voice now steady and commanding, "begin gathering every piece of data we have on the human species, particularly their cognitive capabilities. I want to know everything, from their earliest development to the most recent studies on their psychological and neurological abilities." Zren gave a sharp nod and immediately moved to carry out the Admiral's orders. As he left, Valak turned his attention back to the child on the screen. She was still effortlessly commanding the virtual starship, moving through enemy fire with a level of finesse that should have been impossible. But as he watched, the Admiral began to realize that this was not just the skill of a gifted individual. It was something more, something ingrained in the human race itself. He had heard rumors before of humans exhibiting remarkable abilities in times of great stress, of children being able to solve complex problems that adults couldn't. Stories had spread across the galaxy of young humans displaying extraordinary talent in military strategy, technological innovation, and even art. But none of those stories had prepared him for this. The more Valak thought about it, the more he began to wonder if there was a deeper genetic trait at play. Something inherent in humans that allowed them to see the world differently, to respond to chaos with a calm, strategic mind. The Admiral had always believed that victory in battle came through superior technology, superior training, and careful planning. But humans, these unpredictable beings, had proven him wrong at every turn. His mind raced as he pieced together the history of the human race. The galaxy had watched in awe as they rose from a planet locked in constant warfare, their technology primitive, yet their resilience unmatched. They had adapted to every new challenge, every new enemy, and turned seemingly insurmountable obstacles into opportunities. What had started as an insignificant species on a small world had quickly evolved into one of the most formidable powers in the galaxy. But it was more than just survival. It was their ability to innovate, to think beyond the immediate, to create entirely new paradigms in the face of overwhelming odds. Humans had an uncanny way of turning the tables on their enemies, of using unconventional methods to gain the upper hand. It was almost as if they were wired to thrive in chaos, to operate in a realm where others saw only confusion. The realization struck Valak with the force of a blow. Humans didn't just adapt. They transcended. Their minds were not limited by the rules of logic and reason that govern most species. Instead, they were capable of thinking in ways that were radically different, of coming up with solutions to problems that no one else could even fathom. The Admiral's eyes narrowed as he considered the potential consequences of this revelation. If humans could think beyond the confines of structured warfare, if their minds were capable of functioning in ways that no other species had ever imagined, then the Caltheri, and every other species, would need to completely reevaluate their approach to combat. No longer could they rely solely on superior firepower or tactical advantage. To defeat humanity, they would need to understand the very nature of their thought processes, their ability to innovate and adapt. And that, Valak realized, would be the greatest challenge of all. As the child on the screen executed another perfect move, his mind was set. It was clear now. Humanity was not just a threat. They were the greatest challenge the galaxy had ever faced. And the Admiral knew that whatever came next, it would require a new kind of strategy, one that he had never considered before. Valak spent the next several hours deep in thought, piecing together the data on humanity's remarkable abilities. As the reports came in, the picture began to form with startling clarity. Humans were not just survivors of their environment. They were creatures capable of radical transformation. Time and again, their greatest successes in history had come not through brute force or advanced technology, but through their ability to think and act in ways that defied expectations. Every recorded human victory, from their battles with other species to their innovations in science and technology, seemed to share a common thread. The humans didn't just respond to problems, they'd redefine them. Their minds worked in ways that allowed them to adapt faster than their enemies, to improvise solutions where others saw only dead ends. Their ability to think outside of rigid structures gave them an almost limitless potential. And that was what had struck Valak most. Their minds didn't just process information. They seemed to understand it on a different level. This child, for example, wasn't just navigating a Starship simulation with impressive speed. She was anticipating the simulation's behavior as though she had a sixth sense. Her every move seemed to be one step ahead of the program, as if she could see into the future, or at the very least, predicted its flow with an accuracy that most adults would never achieve. It was a rare gift, perhaps unique to humans, and it set them apart from every other species in the galaxy. Valak stood in front of the observation deck, staring out into the dark void of space as the realization began to sink in. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. For years, they had dismissed the human race as a young species with inferior technology, one that could easily be outmatched and outclassed. But as he considered the data and the evidence before him, it became painfully clear that humans had something far more dangerous than superior technology. They had an ability to think, to innovate, to evolve faster than anyone had expected. As the Admiral reflected on these revelations, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if this child, with her remarkable instincts and abilities, was not an isolated case? What if this was just the tip of the iceberg, and humanity as a whole was capable of similar feats? If that were true, then the entire galactic power balance was about to shift. Zren, Valak called over his communicator, his voice cold and calculated. Gather every intelligence report on human behavior and cognition. I want to know if this pattern is consistent across their species. We need to understand the scope of their abilities. Zren's voice crackled through the comm. Understood, Admiral. I'll get to work on it immediately. Valak turned away from the observation deck, his mind racing. If humans truly had this unique cognitive advantage, it would not just be a matter of technological supremacy or military might. It would be a matter of understanding how their minds worked, how they processed and reacted to the world around them. If the Caltheri were to face humanity in a full-scale war, they would need to rethink everything, from their tactics to their understanding of what constituted strength in battle. As Valak watched the child's avatar once more outmaneuver a seemingly unbeatable fleet, he felt a stirring of both admiration and dread. The humans were not just capable of surviving. They were capable of thriving in a universe that was designed to crush them. They could outthink any enemy, adapt to any challenge, and innovate in ways that no one could predict. This revelation changed everything. The galaxy had been underestimating humanity, and now Valak knew that the greatest challenge they would face in the coming years would not be against superior forces, but against the raw, unpredictable brilliance of the human mind. And that was a force the Caltheri had yet to understand fully. As Valak continued to review the data on humanity, a sense of urgency began to take over. He could no longer dismiss the human race as a minor nuisance. Their ability to adapt and outthink their enemies was unlike anything he had encountered before. The more he studied their history, their victories, their unyielding spirit, the more he realized that humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were an anomaly, one that defied every rule of logic and strategy he had come to rely on. Zren had returned with a report on the general cognitive capabilities of humans, but Valak wasn't interested in generalities. He wanted specifics. He wanted to know how humanity had developed these extraordinary abilities, and whether they were something innate, something ingrained in their very biology. The child's performance on the simulator was evidence enough that there was something more to humanity than met the eye. But now the Admiral needed to understand it in its entirety. "Zren," Valak said, his voice steady, but filled with an intensity that betrayed his concern. "I need to know more. How do humans think? What makes them able to outwit even the most advanced strategies? I want you to look for any patterns, any unusual traits that might explain how their minds work in ways we can't predict." Zren nodded, his face serious. "I'll dig deeper, Admiral. There are references in human history to individuals with remarkable cognitive abilities, strategists, innovators, even artists who changed the course of history with their creativity. But it seems to be more than just intelligence. It's almost as if they can see beyond the present, like they're capable of thinking in multiple dimensions at once." Valak paced across the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "That's exactly it. These humans are not just thinking about the immediate future, they're anticipating it, manipulating it in ways that seem impossible. It's as though they're operating outside the limitations of time and space, predicting outcomes before they even occur." Zren paused, clearly deep in thought. "I've heard theories, Admiral. Some humans believe that their minds are connected in ways we don't fully understand. That there's some sort of collective consciousness, a shared pool of knowledge and experience that they can tap into. Maybe that's part of what makes them so unpredictable." Valak's eyes narrowed. "A collective consciousness. That's an interesting theory. But if it were true, then their minds would operate as one. Wouldn't it be possible to predict their actions if we understood how that collective mind works?" Zren shook his head. "It's not that simple. If anything, this shared consciousness seems to enhance their individuality. Each human can tap into this greater knowledge, but it doesn't mean they think the same way. It seems to give them access to a vast reservoir of ideas, but they still process those ideas in uniquely human ways." Valak stood still for a moment, letting the implications sink in. Humanity's strength lay in their minds, in their ability to adapt, to think in ways that were beyond the grasp of most species. The child in the simulator was a perfect example of that. But the question remained, how could the Caltheri, with all their technological superiority and military might, overcome an enemy that thought like this? How could they fight a species that didn't just follow the rules of combat, but bent them to their will? "We need to know more," Valak said finally, his voice cold with resolve. "If humanity is as unpredictable as it seems, then we cannot rely on conventional strategies to defeat them. We must find a way to understand how their minds work, and use that knowledge against them." Zren nodded, understanding the weight of the Admiral's words. "I'll continue my investigation, Admiral. But it may take time. These humans, they are unlike anything we've ever faced." Valak turned back to the screen where the child's avatar was now taking on a massive fleet with ease. His mind raced as he realized just how much humanity had yet to reveal. The galaxy was about to change, and the Caltheri would either adapt or be swept aside by the raw brilliance of the human mind. As the hours passed, Valak found himself standing alone in the command center, the weight of his thoughts pressing heavily on him. The reports had come in, but the answers they offered were still fragmented, pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. Humanity's cognitive abilities were more complex than anyone had anticipated, and no matter how many records they uncovered, the child's simulation performance haunted him. She wasn't just skilled, she was a harbinger of something far greater. Zren had returned with more information, but it didn't offer the clarity Valak was seeking. Humans, as it turned out, had a deeply ingrained ability to think in abstract terms, to approach problems with creativity and an unpredictable flair that made them impossible to anticipate. They didn't simply adapt to new situations, they transformed them entirely, often inventing entirely new paradigms to solve problems that others deemed insurmountable. Valak couldn't shake the thought that the child he had watched was more than just an anomaly. She represented the potential of the human race. The adaptability, the resilience, the constant push to innovate in the face of adversity. It was all encapsulated in her performance. If this was just the beginning, what could humanity accomplish when given the time and resources to truly explore the depth of their minds? The thought both excited and terrified him. His own people, the Caltheri, had always prided themselves on their strategic minds and disciplined military structure. But the more he considered humanity's capabilities, the more he realized that their advantage lay not in their weapons or ships, but in the uncharted territory of their minds. It was a terrain Valak didn't fully understand, and that lack of understanding made him wary. Turning to Zren, Valak spoke with a newfound sense of urgency. We need to act, and we need to act fast. If humanity's potential is truly as limitless as it seems, then we cannot wait for them to come to us. We must take the first step before they outthink us entirely. Zren looked at him, his expression concerned. What are you proposing, Admiral? Valak's eyes narrowed as he turned to face the large screen that displayed the child's avatar, still flawlessly defeating enemy fleets with ease. We need to study them up close, not just from a distance. We need to understand how their minds work in real time, and we need to learn their strategies before they're fully formed. We'll send an observation team, a small group of humans, real humans, not simulations, to a controlled environment where we can see them react under pressure, in combat, under stress. We'll get closer to the truth of how they think, how they adapt, and how we can counter them. Zren didn't hesitate. I'll make the arrangements immediately. But Admiral, if we're wrong about their capabilities, this could be an unprecedented failure. Humans are unpredictable. If we go in unprepared, they might do what they do best: turn the tables on us. Valak's eyes were cold as steel. That's exactly why we must take this step. We cannot afford to underestimate them any longer. If we do, we risk everything. But if we understand them, truly understand them, then we can either defeat them or find a way to coexist on our own terms. As Zren departed to prepare the operation, Valak remained in the command center, his thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. The Caltheri had always been the hunters, always the ones in control. But humanity had shown them something they had never expected, that sometimes the prey could become the predator. And that realization had changed everything. The Admiral looked at the screen one final time, where the human child was now outwitting an entire fleet once again. The question had never been clearer. Could the Caltheri truly learn to fight a war against a species that thought like this? Could they ever anticipate a species whose very strength lay in their ability to evolve faster than anyone else? Valak knew that the next steps would determine the fate of not just his people, but the galaxy itself. And as he stood there, the child's victory flashing on the screen, he couldn't help but wonder if humanity's brilliance would ultimately be their salvation or their doom.